Tonight, we are going to move slowly through the biggest unsolved mysteries of Vinland Saga, from the questions hidden in the earliest chapters to the unanswered possibilities left behind by the ending. Some of these mysteries concern events that definitely happened but were never shown. Some involve characters whose pasts remain only partly explained. Others are mysteries of meaning rather than plot. They ask us to decide whether a vision was supernatural, whether a failure was inevitable, whether a man truly changed, and whether the dream of Vinland survived even after the settlement itself could not. And so the first unanswered question takes us back before Thorfinn's birth, before Iceland, and before the quiet man we meet as a farmer. What exactly happened to Thor's Snorresson during the years when he was known as the Troll of Jom? We know the outline. Thor's was once one of the greatest warriors among the Jomsvikings. His strength was extraordinary even by the exaggerated standards of the men around him. Thorkel admired him, Floki respected and feared him. The other warriors treated his name as something close to legend. During the Battle of Eithringavaga, Thor's disappeared into the sea and allowed the Jomsvikings to believe that he had died. He escaped, eventually settled in Iceland with Helga, and spent years living quietly as a farmer, husband, father, and neighbor. What we never receive is the full road between those facts. How did Thor's become the Troll of Jom? Was he raised for war from childhood, as so many boys in the story are? Did he join willingly because the Jomsvikings appeared to offer honor, brotherhood, and purpose? Was he already connected to their leadership through Helga and her family? How many campaigns did he fight before his name became famous? How many people did he kill? How many villages saw him not as a noble warrior, but as the terrifying shape moving at the front of an invading force? The story gives us just enough to know that his regret was not abstract. Thor's does not reject violence because he is weak, frightened, or ignorant of battle. He rejects it after mastering it. He knows exactly what victory feels like. He also knows what remains after the cheering ends. That makes the missing years essential. Somewhere inside them, the strongest warrior in the Jomsvikings realized that strength had not made him free. There may not have been one dramatic event. It is tempting to imagine a single battlefield on which Thor's looked down and suddenly understood everything. Perhaps he killed someone who reminded him of himself. Perhaps he watched a child search among the dead. Perhaps he obeyed an order that he could never forgive. Stories often give transformations one clean moment because clean moments are easier to remember. Real change is usually slower. A person can live for years with a growing discomfort that has no name. Each victory adds weight. Each order becomes harder to accept. The old identity continues because everyone around it behaves as though stopping is impossible. Thor's may have deserted not because one event changed him, but because fatherhood, love, exhaustion, and accumulated guilt finally made his old life unbearable. Helga's presence matters here. She's not simply the woman waiting in Iceland after he escapes. She belonged to the world of the Jomsvikings through her father, Sigvaldi. Thor's marriage therefore connected him more deeply to the system he eventually abandoned. Leaving was not merely a military desertion. It was a rejection of status, family expectation, fame, and the identity that had made him valuable to powerful men. The mystery becomes even deeper when we ask how much Helga knew. Did Thor's tell her exactly what he had done in war? Did she watch his doubts grow before the battle in which he vanished? Was the plan to fake his death created by Thor's alone, or did husband and wife quietly prepare for escape together? When Thor's finally reached her again, did she know immediately that the Troll of Jom was gone, even though the same man stood before her? Vinland Saga leaves these questions untouched because we meet Thor's through the eyes of a child. To young Thorfinn, his father seems complete. He is simply there, calm and powerful, carrying a history the boy cannot imagine. Children often experience parents this way. The person existed before them, but that earlier life feels like a legend rather than a reality. Thorfinn only understands much later that his father's peace was built on a private war against the man he had once been. This missing history also changes the meaning of Thor's most famous words. When he says that a true warrior needs no sword, is he repeating a lesson someone once taught him, or is he creating the idea for himself? Did he meet another person who rejected violence before he did? Was there an older warrior, priest, captive, or stranger whose words remained buried in his memory? Or did Thor's reach the conclusion only because every sword he lifted eventually created another reason to lift it again? We never learn whether Thor's had a complete philosophy. He is often treated as though he possessed the finished answer that Thorfinn would spend the series trying to understand. But Thor's may have been at the beginning of the same journey. He had learned what he must refuse. He had not necessarily discovered how to build a society around that refusal. In Iceland, he protected his family and helped his neighbors. He created peace at the scale available to him, yet he still owned weapons. He still lived in a world of slavery. He still accepted structures that Thorfinn would later try to challenge more directly. That does not make Thor a hypocrite, it makes him human. The mystery of Thor's past may be inseparable from the mystery of how far he would have gone if he had lived. Would he have supported Thorfinn's dream of Vinland? Would he have sailed with Leif? Would he have believed a settlement without weapons could survive? Would he have disagreed with his son's refusal to keep even a small defensive force? Thorfinn spends his life pursuing the direction of his father's words, but he can never ask the man who spoke them what the next step should be. This is one of the quiet cruelties of the story. Thor becomes a perfect guide partly because he dies before his ideas can be tested by the later conflicts. He never has to stand between Ivar and the LNU. He never has to choose whether to retreat from land he has spent years building. He never has to watch Einar die after trying to make peace. His wisdom is real, but it remains preserved at the moment of sacrifice. And that leads to another mystery hidden inside the same past. Why was Floki so determined to have Thor's killed? The official explanation is clear enough. Thor's deserted the Jomsvikings. Years later, Floki is ordered to bring him back for the coming war, and he arranges the mission in a way that will end with Thor's death. Desertion from such an organization could not be ignored. Thor's knew too much, embarrassed the Brotherhood, and represented a direct challenge to its values. If their greatest warrior could decide that the entire life was empty, then every man who remained might be forced to question why he stayed. Yet Floki's behavior still feels more personal than simple discipline. He does not confront Thor's openly with the full power of the Jomsvikings. He hires Askeladd and builds layers of distance between himself and the murder. He wants Thor's removed, but he also seems unwilling to place himself directly within reach of the man he condemns. Fear is the obvious explanation. Thor's was stronger than Floki, perhaps stronger than anyone. An open arrest could fail, but fear of physical defeat may not be the whole answer. Floki had built his life around hierarchy, obedience, reputation, and control. Thor's desertion proved that a warrior could simply step outside those structures. Worse, Thor did not spend his freedom regretting the glory he had lost. He found a family and a community. He became the kind of man others trusted without needing rank. To Floki, that life may have looked like an accusation. The two men represent opposite responses to the same world. Thor walks away from power after learning its cost. Floki moves closer to power because he believes security depends on controlling it. Thor becomes less interested in being remembered. Floki becomes obsessed with protecting Baldur's future and his own legacy. Thor accepts that his children must become people he cannot fully command. Floki tries to arrange the world so his grandson will inherit a position chosen for him. Was there an earlier rivalry between them? Did Thor challenge one of Floki's decisions during a campaign? Did the other Jomsvikings naturally look toward Thor in a way that weakened Floki's authority? Was Floki jealous of Thor's relationship with Thorkel, Sigvaldi, or the warriors under them? The story never tells us, but it is difficult to believe that the ambush was born only from a name written on an order. Floki's later panic when Thorfinn returns supports the idea that guilt has been living inside him for years. He does not behave like a man who carried out a routine execution and forgot it. He recognizes the son as unfinished business. He tries to control the consequences of an old decision that has continued moving through history without his permission. The great irony is that killing Thor creates the very force that eventually destroys the Jomsvikings as an institution. Thorfinn enters Askeladd's band because of the murder. He becomes a warrior, survives, changes, reaches Jomsborg, is briefly placed at the center of its succession crisis, and then disbands the brotherhood his father once fled. If Floki had allowed Thor to remain in Iceland, the troll of Jom might have vanished from history. By trying to erase him, Floki sends his ideas back into the heart of Jomsborg through Thorfinn. Did Floki ever understand that? During his exile, did he recognize that the structure he devoted his life to had been undone by the child of the man he ordered killed? We see his defeat, but not the full interior reckoning. His punishment is survival without control. He must live in a future shaped by decisions he can no longer reverse. The unsolved mystery of Floki's motive therefore has several possible answers. He feared Thor's body. He feared his reputation. He feared what desertion communicated. He feared losing authority. And perhaps most deeply, he feared the possibility that Thor's was right. But the ambush itself creates another question. Did Thor's know he was sailing toward his death? He clearly recognizes danger. He knows Floki cannot be trusted. He understands the meaning of the summons, yet he goes because refusing would place his village and family at risk. Once he sees Askeladd's trap, he begins making decisions with unusual calm. He defeats the men without killing them. He wins the duel. He negotiates for the lives of everyone else. When Askeladd breaks the agreement, Thor's appears less surprised than the people around him. This can be read as simple awareness of the world. Thor's knows mercenaries do not have to honor a duel. He understands that arrows can accomplish what swords could not. But there is a more troubling possibility. Perhaps he knew from the beginning that returning alive was unlikely, and the voyage was therefore an extended act of sacrifice. If so, why did he allow Thorfinn to remain aboard after discovering him? He could not turn the ship around without risking the village, but could he have transferred the boy to another vessel? Did he underestimate the danger? Did part of him believe he could still defeat the trap and return? Or did he understand that there was no safe choice once the Jomsvikings had found him? Thor's final decisions are powerful because they are not the decisions of a man certain he will die. They are the decisions of a man who accepts death without surrendering the possibility of life. He fights seriously enough to save everyone. He still looks for a road home. His sacrifice is not a desire to disappear. It is what remains when every other exit has been closed. The mystery is not whether Thor's was brave. It is whether he was already saying goodbye before anyone else realized a farewell had begun. As the arrows strike him, another unanswered life begins. Thorfinn watches his father die and attaches himself to Askeladd's band. For years, he believes the relationship is simple. Askeladd is the enemy, Thorfinn is the avenger. The only honest connection between them is the duel that has not yet ended. But the full story makes that simplicity impossible. What did Askeladd truly feel about Thorfinn? At the beginning, Askeladd uses him. A furious child who can climb, hide, kill, and survive is useful. Promising a duel gives Thorfinn a reason to obey. The arrangement is cruel. Askeladd turns the boy's grief into labor and sends him into dangers that could easily kill him. Yet Askeladd also keeps accepting the duels. He teaches through insults, tests, and punishment. He exposes Thorfinn's anger as weakness. He does not offer comfort, but he does not remove the possibility of growth. In rare moments, his attention resembles that of a reluctant father who refuses to admit that a bond exists. Did Askeladd care about Thorfinn, or did viewers create affection from a relationship built on exploitation? The uncomfortable answer may be both. Human beings are capable of using someone and caring about them at the same time. Affection does not erase harm. Harm does not prove the total absence of affection. Askeladd's own childhood helps explain why his care would take such a distorted form. He grew up watching his mother suffer. He entered the household of the father who had abandoned her. He hid his hatred, learned the habits of powerful men, and waited years before killing Olaf. Survival taught him to turn emotion into strategy. Open tenderness was dangerous. Love became protection carried out through deception. Thorfinn is therefore placed in the hands of a man who may recognize the boy's pain, but has no healthy language for responding to it. Askeladd sees intelligence, speed, stubbornness, and wasted potential. He may also see himself, a child organizing his entire life around killing the man responsible for his suffering. The difference is that Askeladd eventually succeeds. Thorfinn never does. Was this intentional? Did Askeladd keep defeating him because the boy was not ready, or because he never planned to let him complete the revenge at all? A fair duel against an increasingly skilled Thorfinn was not without risk. Askeladd could have refused, he could have killed him, he could have abandoned him after any battle. Instead, he maintains the ritual for years. Perhaps the duel served Askeladd as much as it served Thorfinn. It gave structure to a relationship neither could name. Thorfinn needed the promise of revenge to remain close. Askeladd used the promise to control him, but may also have understood that without it the boy would possess nothing at all. This makes Askeladd's death especially devastating. He does not die in Thorfinn's duel. He removes himself from the story through a decision made for Wales and Canute. The revenge is not defeated. It becomes impossible. Thorfinn discovers that his entire identity depended on the continued life of the man he claimed to hate. Askeladd's final words to him are therefore another mystery. When he tells Thorfinn to move on, to become a true warrior and go beyond the world Thors knew, is this a last act of genuine guidance? Is it guilt? Is it a challenge? Or is Askeladd simply trying to push the boy away from the same emptiness that consumed his own life? He has only seconds. There is no time for apology. Even if there were, Askeladd might not know how to make one. He gives Thorfinn the only gift he understands, a direction. The unanswered question is whether Askeladd had been trying, in his broken way, to give that direction for years. That question becomes even harder to answer when we consider the deepest secret inside Askeladd himself. Did he truly believe that Artorius would return? His mother Lydia fills his childhood with stories of the ancient hero who will come back to save the people of Britain. To a suffering child, the story offers more than entertainment. It promises that history has not forgotten them. It says that the humiliation of the present is temporary, that the rightful protector is only sleeping, and that one day the world will be placed in order. Askeladd grows into a man who appears too intelligent and cynical for legends. He understands money, military movement, political fear, and the selfishness of rulers. He manipulates religious men and mocks warriors who believe songs about Valhalla. He seems to know that myths are tools created by people who need meaning. And yet Artorius remains. He uses the name Lucius Artorius Castus as part of his own identity. He protects Wales with a devotion that goes beyond practical advantage. When Canute transforms from a frightened prince into a ruler willing to challenge his father, Askeladd looks at him with something close to recognition. For a moment, the old story appears to have stepped out of Lydia's voice and entered history. Did Askeladd believe Canute was Artorius? Not literally, perhaps. Canute is Danish, Christian, and born into the royal house Askeladd distrusts. He is not the sleeping Roman-British hero of the legend, but myths do not always return in the form people expect. Askeladd may have believed that Artorius meant any leader capable of protecting the land and uniting people against destruction. Canute's awakening offered a vessel for the hope Askeladd had spent his life pretending not to possess. There is another possibility. Askeladd may have understood that no hero was coming, and therefore decided that someone had to create one. This would make his relationship with Canute less like recognition and more like authorship. He pressures the prince, strips away Ragnar's protection, forces him into danger, and watches for the moment when fear turns into resolve. He helps manufacture the king he needs. In this reading, Askeladd does not wait for Artorius. He tries to build Artorius out of a sheltered young man. But there is a tragedy inside that success. Canute becomes strong enough to survive, yet his strength leads him toward manipulation, conquest, and the lonely logic of the crown. The savior Askeladd helps create cannot escape the machinery of kingship. If Askeladd imagined that one extraordinary ruler could protect the innocent, Canute's later life reveals how quickly protection becomes control. Would Askeladd have approved of the king Canute became? He sacrificed himself to place the prince in power, but he never saw the seizures of land, the political killings, or the growing empire. He never saw Canute stand across from Thorfinn at Ketil's farm, convinced that peace could only be built by gathering enough power to dominate the world around him. Perhaps this is why Artorius remains an unsolved mystery rather than a confirmed belief. The story wants us to feel the danger of waiting for a perfect ruler. Askeladd's dream is noble, but it is still a dream in which history is rescued from above. Thorfinn's dream moves in the opposite direction. He does not want a heroic king. He wants ordinary people to create a place where kings and armies are unnecessary. The two dreams come from the same wound. Both men have seen power destroy the vulnerable. Askeladd searches for the right person to hold power. Thorfinn searches for a way to live beyond it. This connects directly to one of Vinland Saga's strangest mysteries. What exactly happens to Canute when he experiences his transformation? Before Ragnar's death, Canute is withdrawn, anxious, and protected. After his conversation with Willibald and his vision of Ragnar, he emerges with a calm authority that seems almost supernatural. His face changes, his voice changes. Men who dismissed him begin to follow him. He speaks about God's failure, humanity's exclusion from paradise, and his intention to build heaven on earth through his own will. Later, the image of King Sweyn's severed head appears to him. The head speaks as the curse of the crown, mocking the idea that a ruler can remain morally clean. It tells Canute that kingship has its own hunger. The more he tries to use power for good, the more power demands acts that resemble the cruelty he once opposed. Are these visions supernatural? Vinland Saga usually presents itself as a historical story, but it repeatedly approaches the edge of the supernatural. The dead appear in dreams, warriors imagine Valhalla, Thorfinn sees the people he killed clinging to him in a pit, Misquequepudge experiences a vision of a future far beyond his lifetime, Canute speaks with a dead father whose head exists only in his mind. The simplest interpretation is psychological. Ragnar's image is grief, Sweyn's head is guilt and political instinct given a face. Canute is not receiving messages from the dead. He is externalizing thoughts he cannot comfortably call his own. Yet the visions often reveal truths the characters resist. Sweyn's head predicts the pattern of kingship with uncomfortable accuracy. It understands Canute's ambition before Canute fully admits it. If it is merely part of him, then part of Canute already knows that his paradise will require the methods of hell. The mystery matters because it changes how we understand his responsibility. If the crown is a supernatural curse, Canute becomes partly a victim of forces attached to kingship itself. If the head is psychological, then the curse is the collection of choices, fears, and incentives that turn rulers into the people they once opposed. The second explanation is less magical and perhaps more frightening. No demon is necessary. A system can speak through a person using the person's own voice. Canute's transformation also raises the question of what Willibald actually awakens in him. The priest's meditation on love begins with death. A corpse no longer hates, competes, or demands. Nature gives without judging. Human beings divide the world into those they love and those they exclude. Canute takes this argument as proof that humanity has been expelled from perfect love and must create paradise without waiting for God. But is that what Willibald intended? Willibald is not a political strategist. He is a man wandering through theology, alcohol, grief, and disappointment. His definition of love is severe enough to unsettle everyone who hears it. Canute transforms it into a royal mission. The gap between the priest's thought and the prince's action is enormous. Perhaps Canute misunderstands him. Perhaps he hears only the part that justifies rebellion against heaven. Or perhaps Willibald's words do exactly what ideas often do. They enter another person and become something their speaker could never control. The unsolved mystery is not simply whether Canute saw a ghost. It is whether the decisive moment of his life was revelation, breakdown, liberation, or the birth of a more elegant form of violence. For a time, Canute and Thorfinn seem destined to remain connected. They are shaped by the same campaign, the same dead man, and opposite visions of paradise. Canute seeks enough power to create peace from the center. Thorfinn seeks a place at the edge of the known world where power can be left behind. Their meeting at Ketil's farm is one of the great ideological confrontations in the story because neither defeats the other by force. Thorfinn's willingness to endure 100 punches breaks the expected pattern. Canute sees a person who has abandoned the game the king is trying to master. After that meeting, their paths separate. This creates another major unanswered question. What did Canute ultimately think of Thorfinn's experiment in Vinland? Canute knows that Thorfinn intends to build a land without war or slavery. He allows him to go. He continues ruling the North Sea Empire while Thorfinn crosses the Atlantic. The two projects unfold at the same time, but the manga does not bring them together again in a final conversation. Did news of the settlement reach Canute? Did merchants carry stories of Thorfinn Karlsefni and the people attempting to live without weapons? Did Canute consider the experiment naive, admirable, or politically irrelevant? When the settlement failed, did he ever hear why? History tells us that empires notice distant colonies when they offer wealth, strategic value, or prestige. Thorfinn's settlement was intentionally small and disconnected from royal ambition. Its obscurity may have protected it. It also meant that its lessons could disappear easily. Canute's absence from the ending is meaningful. He cannot rescue Vinland, and Thorfinn cannot prove his dream before the king. Their debate remains unresolved because history does not provide a final court in which one philosophy is declared correct. Canute's empire is powerful but temporary. Thorfinn's settlement is peaceful for a time but cannot endure. Both men achieve something. Both men fail. The difference lies in what their failures leave behind. Canute's historical empire fractures after his death. Thorfinn's wheat continues growing in the hands of people who once feared the settlers. One legacy is visible on maps and in royal lists. The other survives through a crop, a memory, and a possibility. Would Canute have understood that as victory? We never know. The mystery of Canute's later thoughts opens into an even quieter question. What became of the people at Ketil's farm after Thorfinn and Einar left? The farm is the place where Thorfinn becomes capable of imagining Vinland. It is also a community shattered by the collision between private weakness and royal ambition. Ketil is exposed as a man whose kindness depended on stability. Arnheid dies, Gardar dies, laborers and retainers are killed in a battle they cannot influence. Alma rejects the fantasy of heroic masculinity and accepts surrender. Snake survives, as do Sverkel and others, but the world they knew is permanently altered. We receive no long epilogue for them. Ketil's fate is especially uncertain. He survives the beating and the battle, but the man who wakes afterward cannot simply return to the person he pretended to be. His farm may continue under reduced circumstances. His family may retain some wealth, yet his authority has collapsed in front of everyone. The borrowed reputation of Iron Fist Ketil has been revealed as a story, and the gentle master has been revealed as a man capable of beating Arnheid to death when fear and humiliation overwhelm him. Does Ketil understand what he did? The manga gives us his breakdown but not his moral recovery. This may be intentional. Not every person receives the kind of transformation Thorfinn does. Regret does not automatically become responsibility. Some people survive the moment that reveals them and then spend the rest of their lives trying not to look directly at it. Alma's future is more hopeful. He begins as a young man desperate to prove himself through violence. He ends by accepting shame in order to save lives. In the values of his society, surrender makes him ridiculous. In the moral structure of the story, it is the first truly courageous decision he makes. What kind of leader does he become afterward? Does he rebuild the farm around different principles? Does he remember Arnheid and the dead retainers when making decisions? Does he free enslaved people, or does the economic structure continue because changing one's heart is easier than changing the system that benefits the family? We do not know. The farm teaches Thorfinn and Einar that slavery is evil, but it does not show slavery disappearing from Denmark. The two men respond by planning to leave. Alma remains. His mystery is whether a person who has awakened inside an unjust structure can transform the structure from within. Then there is Snake, one of the most compelling unanswered pasts in the entire series. We learn that Snake is not his real name. He is Rold, son of Grim. He has connections to Miklagard, the Norse name for Constantinople, and his fighting style, weapon, literacy, discipline, and experience suggest a life far beyond Ketil's farm. What happened to him before he became the leader of a group of gods in Denmark? Was he a member of the Varangian Guard? Did he serve the Byzantine emperor? Was he a mercenary, a criminal, a nobleman's son, or a soldier fleeing a failed oath? Why did he leave one of the greatest cities in the world and settle under an assumed name on a farm? Snake behaves like someone who has already watched a grand life collapse. He has the ability to seek greater status but little interest in doing so. He reads scripture to Sverkel. He drinks, sleeps, enforces order and maintains loyalty to the household that feeds him. His men are rough and often cruel, yet he holds them together through authority that seems earned rather than inherited. His relationship with Sverkel hints that the old man may know more about him than anyone else. Does Sverkel know why Rold became Snake? Did he offer shelter when the warrior had nowhere else to go? Their bond has the quiet quality of two men who do not require complete explanations from one another. Snake's fight with Thorfinn reveals how much of his old self remains. He is fast enough to threaten a warrior who once survived the greatest fighters of the north. He recognizes Thorfinn's movement and forces him to return briefly to the pasture of the child soldier he is trying to leave behind. Yet Snake is not consumed by battle like Thorkel. He fights because Gardar threatens the farm and because he believes responsibility requires action. This makes his later future uncertain. After Ketil's defeat, does Snake stay? Does he protect Sverkel until the old man dies? Does he leave for another road? Does he ever return to Miklagard? The manga allows him to disappear behind Thorfinn's departure, carrying an entire unwritten saga with him. The missing story of Snake also connects to the later missing story of Greece. Thorfinn and his companions eventually travel to the same larger world Snake once knew, but the manga skips most of that journey. Two separate roads lead toward Miklagard, and both remain hidden. Before reaching that mystery, however, the farm leaves us with one question more painful than the fate of any warrior. What happened to Arnheid's first son, Hjolti? Arnheid tells Einar and Thorfinn about the child she lost when raiders destroyed her home. Gardar believed the boy was killed. The trauma becomes part of the chain that drives husband and wife toward their final escape attempt. The child's absence hangs over every imagined future. When Arnheid lies dying, she dreams of being reunited with Gardar and Hjolti beyond the suffering of the farm. The story presents the child as dead, but the historical reality of raids leaves uncertainty. Children were killed, separated, sold, renamed, and absorbed into distant households. Is it possible that Hjolti survived somewhere without his parents ever knowing? There is no evidence that he did. Turning the possibility into a secret happy ending would weaken the truth Arnheid's story is built to express. Countless families in the world of Vinland Saga lose people without receiving confirmation, graves, or answers. The uncertainty is part of the violence. A missing child can remain present in every day that follows. The deeper mystery is what happened to all the people like Hjolti whose stories never reached the saga. Kings are remembered, raids become dates, victories become poems. The enslaved child taken from one coast to another may leave no written trace at all. Arnheid's dream of a peaceful place gives Thorfinn and Einar their direction. Yet even as they name their settlement after her, the person whose suffering helped inspire it cannot see the result. This pattern will repeat throughout Vinland Saga. The dead create obligations for the living, but they cannot tell the living exactly how those obligations should be fulfilled. And so the mystery of Arnheid is not only whether one child survived, it is whether a place built in her memory could ever repair a loss that large. When Thorfinn returns to Iceland and begins gathering the money needed for the Vinland expedition, the story promises a journey greater than almost anything that came before it. Narwhal horns must be carried east and sold in Greece. The route will take the group through ports, rivers, markets, kingdoms, and cultures far beyond the cold Atlantic world of Thorfinn's childhood. Gudrid longs to see places no woman in her household was expected to reach. Leif has spent his life traveling, yet even for him the road is significant. Bug-Eyes sees trade and opportunity. Einar sees the practical path toward the land they have imagined together. Then, after the Baltic Sea conflict is resolved, the manga moves forward by 2 years. The group has been to Greece, they have sold the horns, they have returned with the resources needed to begin the expedition. Thorfinn and Gudrid have become a couple and their companions have grown into a family, but the journey itself is missing. What happened during Thorfinn's years in Greece is perhaps the most famous unsolved mystery of Vinland Saga because the absence is so visible. It is not a small gap between scenes. It is an entire potential saga hidden between pages. How did the group travel? Which rivers and trade routes did they follow? Did they pass through the lands of the Rus? Did they meet Scandinavian warriors serving in Constantinople? Did Thorfinn see the walls, markets, churches, palaces, and crowds of Miklagard? After a life spent in villages, military camps, farms, and fortified settlements, what did one of the world's largest cities look like to him? The journey matters for more than scenery. Thorfinn intends to build a new society. Greece could have shown him forms of government, trade, architecture, religion, agriculture, and urban life unlike anything in the north. Einar might have encountered crops and farming techniques suited to different climates. Hild, with her inventive mind, could have studied mechanisms, ships, tools, and weapons. Gudrid could have learned from travelers who crossed distances once considered impassable. Bugeyes could have become a more experienced merchant and translator. Something must also have changed between Thorfinn and Gudrid. Before the gap, their bond is growing but not complete. Afterward, they return as partners who will marry and raise Karli together. What conversations took place on the road? When did Gudrid understand that Thorfinn was no longer simply the leader of an expedition, but the person with whom she wanted to build a life? When did Thorfinn, who had spent so long believing his hands were fit only for harm, allow himself to accept that someone could love him without requiring punishment or repayment? The answer may have been quiet. A storm survived together, a fever tended in a crowded inn, a night on a riverbank when neither could sleep, a market where Gudrid disappeared into the crowd and Thorfinn discovered how much the thought of losing her frightened him. Great relationships are often decided in moments too ordinary for history. Karli's early childhood also unfolds through this missing period. He begins as an infant rescued from the ruins of violence. By the time the group returns, he has known Thorfinn and Gudrid as his parents for years. The daily work of feeding him, carrying him, calming him, protecting him, and making him laugh is not shown in detail, yet those ordinary acts are part of Thorfinn's transformation. A man who once moved through the world as a weapon learns to organize his day around the needs of a child. Did Karli ever become ill during the journey? Did Thorfinn panic because he could not solve the problem with strength? Did Gudrid teach him how to hold the child without looking as though he expected an ambush? Did Einar become the uncle who could make Karli laugh when everyone else was exhausted? These questions may sound small compared with kings and battles, but they are exactly the experiences that create the adult Thorfinn we meet in the final arc. Hild's presence makes the missing Greece journey even more important. She has sworn to kill Thorfinn if he abandons the path of atonement. For years, she watches him at close range. The time skip removes many of the days in which her hatred must have changed texture. She sees him care for Karli. She sees him refuse easy violence. She sees him negotiate, work, fail, apologize, and continue. Did Hild ever find evidence during the journey that nearly caused her to pull the trigger? Were there moments when Thorfinn's old instincts frightened her? Did he kill anyone to save the group? Did he refuse to fight in a situation where refusing placed others at risk? The later forgiveness in Vinland feels powerful because it arrives after years of observation, but many of those years are hidden from us. Perhaps the gap is deliberate in a thematic sense. The Baltic Sea War gives Thorfinn one final confrontation with the violent world that shaped him. The Vinland arc then tests the society he wants to build. Greece lies between them as a period of relative success, trade, travel, and family growth. It may be the kind of life that history often compresses precisely because no catastrophe defines it. Still, the mystery remains. Vinland Saga shows us how Thorfinn survives war and how he faces the failure of peace. It does not show us as fully how he lives during the years when life is simply opening. One person who might have transformed the journey into chaos is Garm, and his own past remains almost completely unexplained. Garm appears as a warrior with frightening speed, instinct, and joy in combat. Unlike Thorfinn, whose childhood violence grows from grief, Garm seems to experience battle as the purest form of communication. He is fascinated by strong opponents. Rules, politics, and causes barely matter to him. He follows Floki because Floki provides opportunities to fight, not because he believes in the Jomsvikings or Baldur's claim. Where did Garm come from? Who taught him to use a spear? Was his childhood similar to Thorfinn's, Or was he raised in a culture that celebrated his abilities from the beginning? Did he lose a family, escape slavery, join mercenaries, or simply discover that violence made the world feel vivid? Even his name feels more like a title taken from myth than a complete identity. Garm is the hound guarding the underworld, a creature associated with the final breaking of order. The man arrives in the story as though conflict itself has learned to smile. His resemblance to the young Thorfinn is obvious but not exact. Thorfinn fought because revenge gave him a reason to exist. Garm does not need revenge, he loves the contest. This makes him less burdened and in some ways more difficult to change. Thorfinn can eventually discover that the purpose driving him is empty. What discovery could reach a person whose purpose is the sensation of danger itself? After Thorfinn defeats him by manipulating his temper and rhythm, Garm survives. His story does not close with death or conversion. He remains somewhere in the world, still young, still gifted, and perhaps still searching for opponents. Does Garm ever mature? Does he become another Thorkel, living into old age while treating war as play? Does defeat plant the beginning of doubt? Thorfinn wins without returning fully to the person he once was. Perhaps Garm eventually remembers that encounter and realizes that the stronger fighter was the one who no longer wanted the fight. Or perhaps he learns nothing. Vinland Saga does not promise that every person exposed to Thorfinn's example will change. Freedom includes the freedom to continue choosing badly. Garm's future also matters because the Jomsvikings are dissolved, removing the institution that employed men like him. Where do the fighters go when the Brotherhood disappears? Thorfinn's decision to disband the Jomsvikings is one of the largest political acts in the manga, yet its consequences are mostly left outside the story. Thousands of trained warriors do not stop existing because a new leader speaks a command. Their ships, weapons, loyalties, debts, rivalries, and habits remain. Some may enter Canute's service. Others may become mercenaries, bodyguards, raiders, bandits, or settlers. A few may return to farms and families. Many have spent their entire adult lives in a system that converts violence into identity and income. Removing the name does not remove the need the organization satisfied. Did disbanding the Jomsvikings reduce violence or merely scatter it? The answer is probably both. A concentrated military power capable of shaping succession and war is destroyed. No future commander can use Jomsborg in exactly the same way, yet individual warriors carry their training elsewhere. Peace at one center may create instability along 100 roads. Thorfinn does not remain to manage the transition. He does not want political authority, and accepting leadership would contradict the life he is trying to build. His refusal is morally understandable. It may also be politically dangerous. If a violent institution is dismantled without structures for the people leaving it, the strongest local powers usually absorb the pieces. What happens to Jomsborg itself? Does Canute occupy it? Do merchants take over the harbor? Do former warriors form smaller factions? Does the settlement decline once its military importance disappears? The fortress carried the mythology of an elite brotherhood. After the order is gone, are children still raised on stories of its glory? Thorfinn fulfills his father's escape on a larger scale. Thor's deserted the Jomsvikings as one man. Thorfinn ends the organization in name, but the mystery is whether the culture of Jomsborg can ever be disbanded by decree. Balder embodies that uncertainty. He is a child placed at the center of adult ambition because of his ancestry. Floki wants to secure his future by making him chief. Rival factions see him as a symbol. Balder himself does not want the role that others have constructed around him. After Floki is exiled and the Jomsvikings are dissolved, what kind of life does Balder receive? He may finally be free from succession, but he remains the grandson of a man whose plans caused deaths across generations. Does he accompany Floki into exile? Does he resent him? Forgive him, care for him? Does he understand that Thorfinn spared them both despite learning the truth about Thor's murder? Balder could grow into proof that inherited violence does not have to continue. He could also spend his life beneath a name that other men remember. The manga leaves him young enough that either future remains possible. Floki's fate is similarly open. Exile is not execution. Thorfinn refuses to kill him because repeating the murder would surrender to the same chain of revenge. But mercy creates a new question. What does a person do with a life spared by the son of the man he killed? Floki may never become remorseful. He may interpret mercy as weakness. He may remain focused only on Balder, yet he has lost rank, command, and the institution through which he understood himself. The future forces him to live as a private person, which may be a harsher confrontation than death. Does he eventually tell Balder the full truth? Does he speak of Thor as a traitor, a rival, or the better man? Does he admit that his attempt to preserve the Jomsvikings helped destroy them? These conversations belong to an unwritten continuation, and perhaps that is appropriate. Thorfinn chooses not to define Floki's ending through violence. The rest of Floki's life becomes his own responsibility. The Baltic Sea conflict also leaves us with one of the most openly suggestive mysteries in the series: Cordelia's parentage and the life that brought her to Halfdan's farm. The story strongly associates Cordelia with Thorkel. Her enormous size, strength, and appearance make the connection difficult to miss. She speaks of a father she has not known in the ordinary sense, and Thorkel's history makes the possibility entirely believable. The manga does not build this as a detective puzzle requiring a hidden twist. It presents the relationship with enough clarity that the audience can understand what the characters themselves may not state openly. But the details remain unknown. Who was Cordelia's mother? What was her relationship with Thorkel? Did Thorkel know about the child? Did he meet Cordelia when she was young? Did he reject her, fail to understand her, or simply continue moving from war to war without accepting responsibility for the life left behind? Cordelia's identity is handled with unusual tenderness. She is a transgender woman living in a society that can be brutally narrow about gender, family, labor, and strength. Her body causes others to see a warrior, while she seeks a life in which she can be herself without being forced into the role people associate with that body. This makes Thorkel's possible fatherhood more than a joke about size. Thorkel represents a world that defines human worth through battle. Cordelia inherits the physical gifts that world would celebrate, but she does not want the destiny attached to them. Her existence quietly refuses the idea that strength decides identity. What would happen if Cordelia and Thorkel truly spoke as parent and child? Thorkel is violent, impulsive, and shaped by his culture, but he is not always as rigid as the world around him. He respects courage in unexpected forms. Would he accept Cordelia? Would he laugh, misunderstand, boast about her strength, or try in his clumsy way to protect her? The answer could be painful, comic, or surprisingly warm. They never receive that complete meeting on the page. Cordelia's future is instead tied to Vinland, where she becomes one of the settlement's strongest defenders while also longing for a place beyond imposed roles. Her courage during the final conflict demonstrates that she can use her strength without allowing others to define what that strength means. After the evacuation, what becomes of her? Does she return to Iceland? Does she create a household of her own? Does she remain close to Hild, Gudrid, Karli, and the others who knew her in Vinland? The settlement fails as a permanent refuge, but for a time it gives Cordelia social space unavailable elsewhere. The loss of that place may be especially heavy for people whose safety depended not merely on land, but on the community's willingness to see them clearly. Cordelia's unresolved future leads naturally to Hild, whose story reaches emotional resolution while leaving practical mysteries behind. Hild begins as the survivor of one of Thorfinn's raids. Her father teaches her to invent, observe, and solve problems. Thorfinn's attack destroys that life. When she later meets him, she has become a hunter capable of killing him. She spares him under a condition: he must continue his path of atonement and she will watch. Years later in Vinland, Hild forgives him. What exactly makes forgiveness possible at that moment? There is no single new fact. Thorfinn cannot return her father. He cannot undo the raid. He has already spent years behaving differently. Hild has watched him care for Karli, protect others, refuse revenge, and dedicate his life to a land without war. She could have forgiven him earlier or never forgiven him at all. Her decision appears when the settlement has become real enough to prove that Thorfinn's atonement is not only personal. He has taken the life once used to destroy villages and turned it toward building one. Hild sees children, fields, homes, and cooperation where the old Thorfinn would once have brought fire. But forgiveness remains mysterious because it cannot be reduced to a calculation. Hild does not discover that the harm was smaller than she believed. She decides that continuing to hold Thorfinn under a death sentence is no longer the way she wishes to carry her father. Does forgiving Thorfinn also free Hild from the identity created by the raid? For years, her purpose is observation and judgment. Once she forgives him, she must decide who she is without the possibility of punishment waiting in her hands. The final arc hints at an answer. Hild becomes a builder, teacher, strategist, and protector. Her inventions are no longer only tools for hunting. She directs intelligence toward survival, yet we do not see the full life that follows. Does Hild continue inventing in Iceland? Does she write, teach, or pass her father's knowledge to Karli and other children? Could her experience in Vinland affect shipbuilding, farming, navigation, or medicine? In another kind of historical story, Hild might become famous. In this one, her work may disappear into anonymous improvement, used by people who never know the name of the woman who designed it. There is also the question of whether Hild ever forgives herself. Survivors often carry guilt unrelated to moral responsibility. She lived when her family did not. She spent years organizing her life around the man responsible. She helped build a settlement that ended in bloodshed. Forgiving Thorfinn does not automatically settle every grief inside her. The mystery of Hild's future is therefore gentle rather than ominous. After becoming the person who decides whether Thorfinn deserves to live, can she build a life in which she no longer has to stand as anyone's judge? Gudrid's future is also left only partly visible, even though history remembers a woman with her name as one of the great travelers of the Norse world. In the manga, Gudrid begins inside a life chosen for her. She is expected to marry, remain close to home, and accept that the sea belongs to men. Her desire to travel is treated as childish rebellion. By joining Thorfinn's expedition, she crosses not only geography but the boundaries her society has drawn around her identity. The story shows her becoming Karli's mother, Thorfinn's partner, and one of the emotional centers of the settlement. Yet there are years of her life we do not see, including much of the Greek journey and almost everything after the return from Vinland. What does Gudrid do with the knowledge she has gained? She has crossed the North Atlantic, traveled east toward Greece, survived political conflict, helped raise a child on the road, reached Vinland, negotiated life among different peoples, endured pregnancy during a collapsing settlement, and returned carrying memories few people in Iceland could imagine. Does she become a storyteller like Leif? Does she teach children about the world beyond their coast? Does she continue sailing, or does the responsibility of family make later journeys impossible? The historical Gudrid is associated with extraordinary travel, and according to saga tradition, eventually makes a pilgrimage to Rome. Vinland Saga does not tell us whether its Gudrid will follow anything like that path. The possibility is tantalizing. A woman who once had to steal her way onto a ship might one day cross Europe openly as a respected traveler. Her marriage to Thorfinn also contains unanswered emotional space. Thorfinn's past is never truly gone. Gudrid loves a man who has killed many people, carries nightmares, and repeatedly places impossible moral burdens on himself. How much does he tell her? Does he describe every raid? Does he speak about Askeladd in detail? Does he admit how often he still hears the dead? Gudrid is compassionate, but she is not merely a caretaker for Thorfinn's pain. She has her own grief, frustration, fear, and ambition. During the Vinland crisis, she must face the possibility that Thorfinn's idealism will leave their family unprotected. She supports him, but support does not mean the absence of disagreement. After the settlement ends and Einar is gone, do Thorfinn and Gudrid argue about whether the project was worth attempting? Does she resent the risks taken while pregnant? Does Thorfinn withdraw into guilt? Does Gudrid force him to remain present for the children instead of turning failure into another form of self-punishment? The final reunion with their newborn child offers hope. But hope is not a complete biography. The mystery of Gudrid's later life is the mystery of how families live after the dramatic story has ended. Peace must survive tired mornings, difficult harvests, illness, memory, and the ordinary disagreements that sagas rarely preserve. Karli's future may be even more important. He is born from violence, raised by people who choose him, and carried through nearly every stage of the Vinland project. Unlike Thorfinn, Karli grows up surrounded by adults actively trying to prevent war from becoming his education. What kind of man does Karli become? He has Thorfinn as a father, Gudrid as a mother, Einar as an uncle, Hild as a protector and teacher, Bugeyes as a companion, and Leif as part of the extended family surrounding him. He sees the dream of Vinland built and broken while still young. He witnesses people from different cultures cooperate and then turn toward fear. He learns that good intentions are not enough, but also that failure does not erase the value of trying. Karli may remember Einar's death for the rest of his life. Does that memory lead him toward Thorfinn's pacifism, or does it create resentment toward the refusal to prepare for violence? Children do not always inherit the lesson adults intend to teach. Thorfinn's own childhood proves that. Thor spoke of enemies and swords, but the boy who heard him chose revenge. Perhaps Karli becomes the person who modifies Thorfinn's philosophy. He may believe in peace while accepting some form of defense. He may return to Vinland later, or he may decide that the dream is too dangerous. He may carry the story into another generation without repeating either Thorfinn's absolute refusal or Ivar's obsession with weapons. The newborn child at the end creates a similar mystery. The manga closes before the child's future can be known. In historical saga tradition, Thorfinn and Gudrid's son Snorri is remembered as one of the first European children born in North America, although the manga's arrangement of events and children follows its own dramatic logic. The final baby represents continuation rather than a solved genealogy. What will Thorfinn tell his children about Vinland? Will he call it a failure, a beginning, a warning? Will he describe the LNU as friends, enemies, or people trapped in the same fear as the settlers? Will he tell them that Einar died because adults on both sides lost control of events? Will he admit his own mistakes without making the children responsible for redeeming them? The way the story is told may determine what survives. A child who hears only that the settlement was attacked may grow into a conqueror seeking revenge. A child who hears only that the settlers were guilty may inherit shame without understanding. Thorfinn must find a truthful language complicated enough to preserve humanity on both sides. That is one of the great mysteries after the ending, whether his children inherit Vinland as a place, a wound, or a moral direction. Leif Erikson is the person most likely to turn events into story, and his final fate remains largely outside the page. Leif is old when Thorfinn is a child, and the search for the missing boy consumes years of his life. He crosses seas, follows rumors, spends money, makes mistakes, and refuses to accept that Thorfinn has vanished forever. His persistence becomes one of the quiet forms of love holding the entire narrative together. How does Leif survive so much? This question can be asked humorously. He appears at the right places, travels enormous distances for his age, endures storms and political danger, and continues returning to the sea long after many people would have retired. But beneath the humor is a real mystery about the source of his endurance. Leif carries guilt. His stories of Vinland filled young Thorfinn with longing for adventure. When Thorfinn sneaks onto Thor's ship and disappears into war, Leif may feel partly responsible. Searching for him is therefore not only loyalty to Helga and Thor's. It is a promise to repair something he fears his own stories helped break. Does Leif ever forgive himself after bringing Thorfinn home? The reunion should release him, but the man he returns is not the child who left. Leif cannot restore the lost years. He can only support the future Thorfinn chooses. His relationship with Bugeyes adds another layer. Bugeyes is also called Thorfinn, and Leif initially mistakes him for the person he has been seeking. Over time, the mistaken substitute becomes family in his own right. Does Bugeyes know whether Leif first cared for him because of the name? Does that matter by the time affection becomes genuine? Leif's later age makes the Vinland expedition especially uncertain. Does he reach the settlement in the manga's full timeline, or remain more closely tied to the preparation and routes around it? How long does he live after the final chapter? Does he hear the complete story of what happened? Is he able to tell the next generation that reaching Vinland was real even though remaining there proved impossible? The historical Leif becomes famous as the discoverer of Vinland. The fictional Leif's most important achievement may be less celebrated. He refuses to stop searching for one lost child. The mystery is whether he understands that this, rather than any coastline, is the voyage that changed the world around him. Bugeyes, by contrast, survives as one of the series' great ordinary people. He is not a legendary fighter, king, prophet, or moral philosopher. He complains, bargains, panics, translates, observes, and often reacts to danger with the sensible desire to avoid it. That makes his unresolved future unusually valuable. What does Bugeyes do after Vinland? He has traveled farther than almost anyone. He has learned languages and trade. He has seen the inside of Thorfinn's dream and the conflict that destroyed its first form. He may return to commerce. He may become a navigator or interpreter. He may tell exaggerated stories in harbors, becoming a less solemn version of Leif. Because he lacks the aura of a hero, Bugeyes may also be the most reliable carrier of practical memory. He remembers what supplies were needed, what trades worked, how misunderstandings began, what weather did to the ships, and which grand plans failed because someone forgot an ordinary detail. Future expeditions would need that knowledge more than speeches about destiny. Does anyone listen to him? History often remembers the leader and ignores the person who understood the route. All of these personal futures return us to the geographic mystery at the center of the title. Where exactly is the Vinland settlement in the world of the manga? The story draws from the Norse voyages described in the sagas and from modern knowledge of contact in North America. The landscape, indigenous communities, climate and route evoke regions along the northeastern coast of the continent. The archaeological site at Elant's Ox Meadows proves that Norse people reached Newfoundland around the period in which the story is set. The manga also uses Epiquik, associated with present-day Prince Edward Island, and identifies the LNU in ways connected to Mi'kmaq history and culture. But fictional geography is not always a one-to-one map. Yukimura combines historical research, saga tradition, and dramatic needs. Thorfinn's Vinland is a specific place within the story, and also a symbolic landscape large enough to carry the idea of somewhere beyond war. Could the settlement be located precisely using the coastline, travel times, plants, and conversations shown? Fans can compare maps and infer routes, but the story resists becoming a navigation manual. The ambiguity protects the symbolic meaning. If Vinland were reduced to one coordinate, viewers might mistake the dream for a property claim. The more important geographic mystery is what the land means to the people already living there. To the Norse, Vinland is distant, fertile, and apparently open. To the LNU, it is not a new world. It is home, memory, hunting ground, burial ground, and the center rather than the edge of existence. Thorfinn understands this more than many settlers, but even he arrives carrying the language of discovery. The dream of an empty land is exposed as a misunderstanding. There is no morally untouched place waiting for newcomers. Every place is already connected to someone's life. This is why the vision experienced by Misquequipudge becomes one of the most controversial and unresolved mysteries in the final arc. During a ritual, the shaman sees images of a future in which newcomers transform the land on an enormous scale. He sees destruction, industrialization, weapons, environmental damage, and the long catastrophe of colonization. The vision convinces him that the Norse presence is not a small local event. It is the beginning of something that could consume the future of his people. What exactly does he see? If the images are literal, then Vinland Saga briefly confirms the supernatural. A man in the 11th century is shown, events far beyond any reasonable prediction. The vision is not merely a general fear of invasion. It resembles the historical future known to the modern reader. If the vision is symbolic, then the images may belong more to us than to him. Yukimura could be translating spiritual fear into visual language the audience understands. Msquequpug feels the danger of an expanding culture, and the manga represents that intuition through the future we know followed. There is also a psychological interpretation. The shaman has observed the settlers' technology, hunger for land, animals, crops, disease, and disagreements. He may not see exact history so much as the logical end of patterns already present. A single iron tool implies mines, furnaces, forests cut for fuel, and systems capable of producing more tools. A single settlement implies ships returning with relatives. A sword carried against the rules implies that promises can weaken under fear. From this perspective, the vision is prophecy only because power tends to repeat recognizable behavior. Yet the precision remains unsettling. Vinland Saga spends much of its story questioning religious certainty and heroic myth. The sudden possibility of genuine foresight changes the tone. Is Msquequpug uniquely gifted? Do spiritual practices in the story access something real? Are the appearances of Thors, Askeladd, Ragnar, and Sweyn also more than internal visions? The manga never offers a system explaining the supernatural. That may be deliberate. People living in the period did not divide psychology, religion, dream, memory, and prophecy in the way modern categories often do. A vision could be spiritually real and psychologically meaningful at the same time. The more difficult mystery is whether Msquequpug is right to act on it. He sees a future horror and tries to prevent it by removing the settlers. From his position, delay could be fatal. If he waits until proof is undeniable, the process may already be impossible to stop. His fear is not irrational. Modern history confirms the scale of what indigenous peoples will face after European expansion. But the specific settlers around Thorfinn are not yet that future. Many are trying to build peaceful relationships. Some are willing to leave. Others are dangerous, but no single person controls everything that will happen centuries later. Treating them as the complete embodiment of future colonization risks creating the very conflict the vision warns against. This is the tragedy of prophecy. Knowing a possible future does not provide a clean method for preventing it. Every action taken in fear changes the road. Did the vision show an unavoidable future, or only one possibility? If Msquequpug had trusted Thorfinn, could their local peace have lasted even though other Europeans eventually arrived? Could the knowledge and alliances created by the settlement have prepared the LNU for later contact? Or would any sustained Norse presence have accelerated expansion and disease regardless of Thorfinn's intentions? The manga refuses to answer because the historical scale is too large for one friendship. Thorfinn can choose his behavior. He cannot control the ships of people not yet born. That may be the true terror inside Msquequpug's vision. He is not only afraid of the settlers he can see, he is afraid of an entire future that no agreement with one good man can bind. The arrival of disease makes that fear immediate. Illness spreads among the LNU after contact with the Norse, and the cause becomes one of the forces pushing both communities toward suspicion. Who exactly brought the disease? The story understands what modern readers know. Populations separated for long periods can carry different immunities, and contact can spread illness even when nobody intends harm. The settlers do not need to poison anyone. A person with no visible symptoms may transmit something devastating to people without previous exposure. Within the character's knowledge, however, invisible transmission is almost impossible to understand. Illness appears after foreigners arrive. Spiritual, moral, or deliberate explanations become more believable than microbes no one can see. Could the outbreak have been prevented? If Thorfinn had required a period of isolation after landing, would that have helped? Did the settlers possess any practical knowledge about quarantine? Would a smaller group have reduced the danger or merely delayed it? The manga does not trace one identifiable patient and chain of infection, leaving the source uncertain. This uncertainty is thematically important. Violence usually provides a visible attacker. Disease creates victims without offering a person who can confess, apologize, or be defeated. Thorfinn's ethic is built around human choices, but he enters a conflict shaped partly by biology. How can someone take responsibility for harm they did not intend and could not fully understand? Thorfinn's answer is to recognize the harm anyway. Good intentions do not entitle the settlers to remain. If their presence is killing people, the moral argument for leaving becomes stronger even if no one deliberately caused the deaths. For some settlers, this is difficult to accept. They have worked, planted, built homes, and made agreements. They do not feel like invaders. They see themselves as people creating a future. But from the other side, consequences matter more than self-image. The unsolved mystery of the disease is therefore not merely medical. It asks whether innocence is possible when one group's ordinary arrival changes another group's world in deadly ways. The story offers no comfortable answer. It only shows that refusing malicious intent is not the same as repairing damage. Once illness and prophecy have created fear, the next mystery seems simple but is almost impossible to answer. Who actually caused the war in Vinland? A reader can point to individual decisions. Ivar brings a sword against Thorfinn's rules. Styrk encourages suspicion and thinks constantly in terms of power. Misquequipudge becomes convinced that the settlers must be removed. Men on both sides interpret uncertainty as preparation for attack. Weapons appear, trust weakens, and events begin moving faster than anyone's ability to explain them. But identifying one cause depends on where the story begins. If we begin with the first hidden sword, then Ivar is responsible for introducing the symbol and practical possibility of armed resistance. Thorfinn made the absence of weapons central to the settlement. The rule was not decorative. It was meant to prevent fear from becoming an arms race. By secretly carrying a sword, Ivar created the very condition the rule was designed to avoid. If we begin with the settlers' arrival, however, the responsibility is broader. They entered land already inhabited, brought disease, cut forests, planted crops, kept animals, and imagined permanence. Even peaceful settlement changes the balance of a place. The LNU did not ask for an experiment in European pacifism to be conducted in their home. If we begin with Misquequipudge's vision, his effort to force the settlers away accelerates conflict. Yet from his perspective, waiting could condemn generations. He does not possess the reader's distance. He sees the end of a road and responds to danger before everyone else accepts that the road exists. If we begin with Styrk, the problem becomes manipulation. Styrk understands how fear can be directed. He knows that a sword is not only a weapon but a political argument. He repeatedly frames Thorfinn's restraint as weakness and presents armed leadership as realism. He does not create every tension, but he knows how to turn tension into authority. If we begin with Ivar's death and the retaliation that follows, blame shifts again. Each side sees the latest wound more clearly than the earlier chain. Grief compresses history. The person standing in front of you becomes responsible for everything that led to the body behind you. Vinland Saga deliberately denies us the satisfaction of a single villain. Even characters who make terrible choices have fears rooted in something real. That does not make all actions equally justified. It means causation and moral responsibility do not fit neatly into the same shape. Thorfinn carries responsibility because he founded the settlement and believed trust could survive without stronger preparation. Ivar carries responsibility because he violated the condition on which that trust depended. Styrk carries responsibility because he treated conflict as a route to influence. Misquequipudge carries responsibility because his certainty about the future narrowed the possibilities of the present. The warriors who strike, the leaders who fail to communicate, and the frightened people who spread rumors each add force. The war is caused by everyone and no one, which is why it feels historically true. Large violence often emerges from many decisions, each of which appears limited to the person making it. By the time the whole pattern becomes visible, people feel trapped inside consequences they helped create but never intended to control. This raises a more precise mystery. Why does Ivar bring the sword, and what does the sword truly mean to him? Ivar insists that weapons are necessary. He does not trust Thorfinn's promise that negotiation and retreat will be enough. In practical terms, his concern is not absurd. The settlement is distant from help. Unknown dangers exist. A leader who forbids weapons assumes responsibility for protecting people through other means. Yet Ivar's attachment to the sword is emotional as well as practical. He wants to be the person whose realism is proven correct. He measures leadership through the ability to defend. The weapon gives him status before it gives him safety. Would he ever have accepted evidence that the sword was unnecessary? Or was every peaceful day merely a period in which danger had not yet revealed itself? This is the logic of permanent fear. The absence of attack cannot disprove the need for weapons because fear interprets peace as temporary. Once a weapon exists, others must account for it. The LNU cannot know whether the sword will remain hidden. Settlers who oppose Ivar must consider what will happen if he uses it. The object changes relationships before it cuts anyone. But Thorfinn's position also contains an unresolved weakness. Removing swords does not remove violence. Axes, bows, tools, fists, fire, and numbers can all kill. A settlement must still make decisions about restraint, law, emergency, and responsibility. Thorfinn relies heavily on his own moral authority and reputation. What happens when people no longer agree with him? The mystery is whether a weaponless society can survive without becoming dependent on one unusually respected leader. Thorfinn does not want to rule as a king, but his vision holds the community together. When trust in him fractures, there is no strong shared institution capable of resolving the disagreement. Could the Vinland project have succeeded with clearer councils, agreed procedures, interpreters, quarantine practices, and conflict mediation? Could Hild's ingenuity and Gudrid's social intelligence have been built into a structure less dependent on Thorfinn? The story tests an ideal through one settlement, but it does not claim that this was the only possible design. This is important because failure can be interpreted too quickly. If one attempt collapses, critics may say the principle was impossible, but a bridge can fail because gravity makes bridges impossible, or because that bridge was built without enough support. The difficult task is knowing which kind of failure occurred. Stayek seems certain he knows. For him, power is the answer hidden beneath every argument. He observes Ivar, Thorfinn, and the settlers with a strategist's eye. He encourages the conditions in which his preferred kind of leadership becomes necessary. What does Stayek actually want? He can be read as a loyal friend helping Ivar gain the influence he deserves. He can also be read as the more intelligent man using Ivar's pride as a vehicle. Stayek rarely needs to stand at the front. He shapes the person who does. Does he truly believe the settlement faces unavoidable attack, or does he need danger because danger validates his worldview? A peaceful Vinland leaves little role for a political mind trained to compete. Conflict creates hierarchy, urgency, secrecy, and the opportunity to become indispensable. Stayek is unsettling because he is not a berserker. He is calm, he thinks ahead. He understands that people can be moved more effectively through fear than direct command. In another story, these qualities might make him an excellent advisor. Here, they reveal how intelligence can become dangerous when it assumes that domination is the deepest truth of human behavior. After the settlement's collapse, does Stayek reconsider anything? Does he interpret the outcome as proof that he was correct all along? People rarely learn from events that can be arranged to support their existing beliefs. He may return to the north convinced that Thorfinn's weakness destroyed Vinland, ignoring the role his own manipulation played. If he tells the story, what version survives? Perhaps later settlers hear that peaceful men were attacked because they foolishly lacked weapons. Perhaps the disease, broken promises, and internal division disappear. The historical memory of Vinland could become ammunition for the very worldview Thorfinn opposed. This brings us to the LNU characters whose own futures remain unresolved. Niskawajij, PLMK, Gajaki, and the people around them are not simply obstacles in a Norse adventure. They have their own disagreements, loyalties, fears, humor, knowledge, and visions of what contact might become. What happens among them after the Norse leave? The final image of wheat growing suggests that exchange survives. Seeds remain when ships depart. Agricultural knowledge crosses the boundary even after political trust collapses. But wheat is not neutral. It can represent cooperation, adaptation, and shared labor. It can also mark the beginning of ecological and economic change. Will the community continue cultivating it? Does it supplement existing food systems or transform them? Do people remember Thorfinn when they see the crop, or does the plant become detached from the story of its arrival? PLMK's choice to sow the wheat is especially meaningful. It suggests that rejecting permanent settlement does not require rejecting everything the settlers brought. Cultures can resist domination while still choosing exchange. The future does not have to be pure separation or total absorption. Yet the sword also remains as a counterimage. Knowledge and weaponry both cross between peoples. One can feed, one can kill. Neither remains under the control of the person who introduced it. Which inheritance becomes stronger? The manga ends before history answers. Modern history gives us a broad and painful answer about later colonization, but the specific relationships formed during Thorfinn's expedition may still matter locally. A seed can survive inside a future dominated by forces its giver never imagined. So can a warning. Niskawajij's future is equally open. He learns from Misquequipaj, but younger people do not always inherit an elder's conclusions unchanged. Does he continue the path of resistance? Does he remember Thorfinn as a danger, a friend, or both? Does he become a leader capable of holding the complexity that the older generations fear and the settlers' hope could not reconcile? Gayaki and others who experienced direct cooperation may tell different versions of the conflict. Within the LNU community, the Norse encounter could remain debated for years. Some may say the foreigners were always a threat. Others may say peace was possible until particular men chose violence. Children born afterward may ask why the strange northern houses were abandoned. Their unanswered stories are essential because the title Vinland Saga can tempt us to imagine that the saga belongs only to the travelers. But every arrival creates two histories, the story of those who came and the story of those who watched them arrive. The deepest personal wound in the final conflict is Einar's death, and it creates several mysteries at once. Einar is not merely Thorfinn's friend, he is the person who helps Thorfinn return to life. On Ketil's farm, Einar provides anger when Thorfinn has become numb, companionship when he expects isolation, and a future when the past appears to contain everything. Their dream of Vinland is shared. Arnheid's memory belongs to both of them. The fields are not decoration around their friendship. Farming is the language through which they learn that labor can create rather than destroy. When Einar dies during the attempt to end the conflict, the dream loses one of its founders. Could his death have been prevented? Any answer risks simplifying the chain. If Thorfinn had allowed weapons, perhaps Einar would have been protected, or perhaps the conflict would have become deadlier much earlier. If the settlement had left sooner, perhaps everyone would have survived, but perhaps the evacuation itself would have triggered attack. If Ivar had obeyed, if Misquequipaj had trusted, if disease had not spread, if communication had been clearer, the moment might never have arrived. The painful fact is that Einar dies after a truce is possible. The death is not the necessary conclusion of a glorious battle. It is the kind of final violence that can occur when peace has been agreed, but anger has not yet stopped moving. What does Einar think in his last moments? Does he feel betrayed by Thorfinn's vision? Does he still believe in it? Does he think of Arnheid, his mother, his sister, the farm, or the first tree he and Thorfinn cut together? The manga does not turn his death into a long speech. That restraint protects its shock but leaves the interior moment unknown. Thorfinn must then live with the question no philosophy can fully answer. Was the dream worth the life of the person who shared it? Einar chose the journey. He was not a passive follower. He wanted Vinland with a conviction rooted in his own losses. But Thorfinn was the leader, the symbol, and the person whose rules shaped the settlement. Responsibility gathers around him even when blame cannot be assigned cleanly. Does Thorfinn ever forgive himself for Einar's death? His life after revenge has been defined by atonement. He responds to guilt by taking on more responsibility. This can produce compassion, but it can also become a way of believing he must personally repair everything. Einar's death threatens to return him to the pit, not as the child warrior he once was, but as the founder whose peaceful project failed to protect his closest friend. Gudrid, Hild, Karli, and the newborn child may be the people who keep him from turning grief into self-erasure. Thorfinn must learn again that carrying the dead does not mean disappearing beneath them. Einar's legacy remains in the wheat. He knew soil, labor, and the patience required to make life grow. The final sprouting crop can be read as his continuation as much as Thorfinn's. The settlement withdraws, but the farmer's work takes root among people who will remain. Would Einar consider that enough? Perhaps not. A symbol cannot replace a life. Yet Einar never sought fame. If something he planted feeds people after his death, that may be closer to his values than a monument carrying his name. The unanswered future of Arnheid's village is part of this. The settlers named their community to preserve her memory. After they leave, does the name survive anywhere? Do the LNU know who Arnheid was? Does Thorfinn establish another farm in Iceland bearing her name? Do Karli and the younger children continue telling her story? Names disappear easily when the people who speak them scatter, but the moral origin of the settlement can survive without the exact word. Every time the survivors refuse slavery, help a displaced person, or plant food for someone else, Arnheid's life continues to influence a world that never treated her as historically important. This leads to a larger mystery about the final chapter. What does the title "Somewhere Not Here" actually mean? From the beginning, Vinland is described as a place beyond the known suffering of the present. For enslaved people, soldiers, fugitives, women trapped by expectation, and families threatened by war, somewhere not here is a powerful promise. It means there is another shore, another law, another way to live. But the story repeatedly warns that changing location does not automatically change humanity. Thorfinn carries his past across the sea. Settlers carry fear, hierarchy, ambition, and weapons. Disease travels with bodies that do not know they are carrying it. The dream arrives in Vinland with everything it hoped to escape. So does somewhere not here mean the next physical place? At the ending, Thorfinn returns from the failed settlement rather than discovering a final untouched land farther away. He meets his child. The wheat grows behind him across the ocean. The phrase begins to sound less like a coordinate and more like an unfinished moral movement. Somewhere not here may mean any condition different from the one we have accepted as inevitable. For a slave, it is freedom. For a warrior, it is a life without killing. For Gudrid, it is a world beyond the role assigned to her. For Cordelia, it is a community in which she can live as herself. For the LNU, it is a future in which contact does not become erasure. The danger is that the phrase can also become escape. A person can keep searching for a pure place instead of changing the relationships around them. Thorfinn initially imagines Vinland as distant enough to avoid the structures of Europe. The final arc teaches him that there is no distance beyond human responsibility. Does he therefore abandon the idea of somewhere not here? The ending suggests the opposite. He understands it differently. The new place must be created within imperfect conditions again and again. There may be no final shore on which the work ends. The title remains mysterious because hope and avoidance use similar language. Both say there must be somewhere else. The difference lies in whether the traveler carries responsibility into the new place. Thorfinn's next attempt is not shown. That absence creates perhaps the largest plot mystery left after chapter 220. What does he do for the rest of his life? Historical tradition gives us fragments about Thorfinn Karlsefni and Gudrid, but the fictional character has traveled through experiences that make his later path uniquely his own. He returns to a society still shaped by slavery, feud, inequality, and war. He has lost Einar and the settlement. He has gained a newborn child, surviving family, and knowledge that his first design was incomplete. Does he attempt to build another peaceful community in Iceland? The North does not offer the same geographic isolation, but it offers relationships, land, and people who know him. Perhaps the next Vinland is smaller, a farm that refuses slave labor, a household open to people fleeing violence, a local agreement that prevents one feud, a network of travelers carrying different customs between settlements. Does Thorfinn become politically active? He has connections to Halfdan, Canute, former Jomsvikings, merchants, and respected families. He dislikes power, but avoiding formal authority does not remove social influence. People may seek his judgment. His reputation may grow despite his wish to live quietly. Could he become a law speaker, mediator, teacher, or advocate against slavery? Would he accept such a role, or fear that authority would recreate the problem he escaped? His body also carries the cost of the story. Years of battle, slavery, labor, travel, and injury have left scars. The wounds suffered in Vinland may affect him permanently. Does he remain physically capable of farming and sailing? Does age bring pain that forces him to depend on others? A man who built his identity around carrying burdens may struggle when he becomes the person who must be carried. How long does he live? How does he die? The series does not show an old Thorfinn looking back. This prevents the ending from becoming a simple judgment delivered by age. We cannot ask him whether he succeeded, because he may never decide the question for himself. Perhaps he dies peacefully in Iceland, surrounded by family, which would already represent a profound break from the fate his childhood seemed to promise. Perhaps he travels again. Perhaps he reaches another shore. Perhaps his final years are ordinary and therefore absent from written history. The greatest unresolved part of Thorfinn's life may be whether he ever stops searching. Not searching for a perfect land, but searching for a better response to the person standing before him. His dreams of the dead also remain unexplained. Throughout the story, Thorfinn sees the people he killed. They cling to him in a vast pit of violence. Askeladd appears, Thors appears. In the ending, the dead again become part of his inner landscape. Are these only dreams? Psychologically, they represent trauma, guilt, memory, and the mind's attempt to give form to moral injury. Thorfinn cannot remember every victim as a complete person. The dream gathers them into bodies whose weight he feels even when their names are lost. But the dead sometimes seem to possess voices beyond his conscious intention. Askeladd challenges him, Thors watches. The victims can appear accusing, demanding, or strangely forgiving. The boundary between memory and encounter remains open. If the visions are supernatural, then Vinland Saga contains an afterlife that does not resemble the heroic Valhalla celebrated by warriors. The dead do not feast in glory. They remain connected to the consequences of violence. Thorfinn's atonement matters not only to the living, but to people beyond death. If the visions are internal, they may be even more significant. Thorfinn has developed an inner moral community made from everyone his former self refused to recognize. The dead speak, because he has finally granted them personhood inside his mind. Can they forgive him? Hild can choose forgiveness because she is alive. The dead cannot speak in ordinary reality. Any forgiveness Thorfinn receives from them risks becoming something he gives himself. Yet refusing all self-forgiveness can also become selfish. It keeps his attention fixed on his guilt rather than the people who need him now. The mystery is whether atonement has an end point. How many lives must he save before he is allowed to live without imagining execution? There is no moral arithmetic capable of balancing the people he killed against the people he helps. Vinland Saga's answer seems to be that atonement is not a payment completed at a certain total. It is a direction. Thorfinn cannot become innocent, but he can become responsible. He can accept joy without pretending the past did not happen. Whether the dead truly visit him is less important than what he does when he wakes. The uncertain boundary between literal event and remembered story appears in another, much stranger mystery. What exactly is Ymir? During the struggle at Jomsborg, Floki unleashes an enormous chained fighter whose size, strength, and appearance seem to push beyond the already exaggerated physical world of Vinland Saga. Thorkel meets the creature with delight. The battle is treated with the wild energy of legend rather than the grounded tension of the farm or Vinland arcs. Is Ymir simply an unusually large human being? The world contains Thorkel, Thors, Garm, and other fighters capable of feats no ordinary person could perform. Physical exaggeration has always been part of the series. Ymir may be the farthest extension of that style, a human man reduced by captivity and treatment into something others describe as a monster. If so, his story is horrific. Who was he before Floki chained him? Where did he come from? Could he speak? Was he captured as a child, purchased, or raised for combat? The name Ymir, taken from a primordial giant of Norse myth, may have been assigned to erase whatever human name he once possessed. There is almost no space given to his interior life. He exists as a secret weapon and a challenge for Thorkel. This absence may be the point. Violent systems turn people into functions. One man becomes a spear, another becomes a commander. Ymir becomes a beast because those controlling him find the category useful. A more playful interpretation is that Ymir signals the saga-like nature of the narrative. Old stories enlarge warriors, distances, monsters, and battles through retelling. Perhaps a powerful captive existed, and the version preserved in the tale grew until he seemed almost inhuman. Thorkel himself may be partly shaped by that same process. The man becomes the giant because history remembers his appetite for war more clearly than his ordinary dimensions. This leads to the mystery of how literally we should interpret any extraordinary feat in Vinland Saga. Did Thors truly leap between ships exactly as shown? Could Thorfinn run along surfaces and survive impacts that would kill another person? Is Thorkel's strength physical reality within the fictional world, or are we seeing the way frightened soldiers later described him? The manga never introduces an explicit narrator who tells us which details have been magnified. Yet the title itself invokes saga, a form built from history passed through memory and storytelling. The impassable edge of the action may be reminding us that even a serious historical account is still a story shaped by people. Thorkel stands at the center of that legendary exaggeration, and his later life remains one of the great unresolved character questions. He begins and ends as a man who loves battle. Unlike Thorfinn, he does not experience violence as a chain he wishes to escape. Unlike Askeladd, he does not use war mainly as a tool for political purpose. He feels fully alive when facing strong opponents. Yet Thorkel is not simple. He loved and admired Thors. He recognizes something in Thorfinn. He can follow Canute's authority. He is capable of affection, humor, memory, and moments of surprising insight. What did Thors say to him before deserting? Did Thorkel notice his friend changing? Did he dismiss the doubts as temporary weakness? When Thors vanished at sea, did Thorkel truly believe he was dead, or suspect that a man strong enough to survive had chosen another life? Thorkel's fascination with the meaning of a true warrior suggests that Thors left behind an unresolved question inside him. He knows that Thors possessed a kind of strength beyond combat, but he cannot fully value a life without the thrill of battle. He follows the question as far as his nature allows, then returns to the next fight. Does Thorkel ever change after the Jomsvikings are dissolved? Historically, men like him age even when legend refuses to imagine them old. His body must eventually slow. What happens when battle no longer welcomes him in the same way? He may die fighting, the end he seems to prefer. He may survive into an old age he never planned for. He may sit among younger warriors who exaggerate campaigns he remembers differently. Perhaps he finally understands Thors only when strength can no longer be expressed through a weapon. His possible relationship with Cordelia could become part of that change. A child who inherited his size but rejected the warrior identity might force Thorkel to confront the difference between strength and desire. Whether he is capable of that confrontation remains unknown. Thorkel is one of the few major characters who does not need redemption to remain compelling. His mystery is whether the story believes every person can change, or only that every person has the capacity to choose. A capacity can remain unused for an entire life. The people waiting in Iceland raise a different kind of unanswered question. What did Helga and Ylva truly experience during all the years Thorfinn was gone? The main story follows the boy into war, but his family lives through his absence without knowing whether he is alive. Helga loses Thors and Thorfinn on the same voyage. Ylva loses a father and brother, then must continue the practical work of life. Leif searches, but news is uncertain. Every returning ship could carry an answer. Every winter makes the missing child older in imagination. At what point does hope become painful? Did Helga ever prepare herself to accept that Thorfinn had died? Did Ylva resent him for leaving, even though he was a child driven by trauma? When Thorfinn finally returns, Ylva initially fails to recognize him. The moment is humorous, but underneath it lies the violence of time. The brother she remembers did not grow beside her. She cannot connect the worn adult to the boy preserved in memory until proof forces the two images together. What conversations happen after the reunion? Does Thorfinn tell Helga exactly how Thors died? Does he admit that he traveled with the killer for years? Does he describe his own killings? A mother may want the truth and fear it at the same time. Helga's response is gentle, but gentleness does not mean she feels no anger. She may grieve the child Thorfinn could have been. She may see Thors in his face and wonder whether both men were driven toward impossible ideals. The manga does not turn her into a judge because home must first become a place of return. Ylva has built a life defined by responsibility. She worked while Thorfinn fought. She married, raised children, and maintained the household. When her brother announces another enormous voyage, does part of her think he is leaving again? Does she believe in Vinland or tolerate the dream because stopping him would only create another kind of loss? After the settlement fails, Thorfinn returns with Gudrid, Karli, a newborn child, and grief. Ylva and Helga will see that the boy who once came home from war has now come home from peace, wounded in a different way. How do they help him? Perhaps the final Vinland is partly the ordinary household he once ran from, not because Iceland is free of violence, but because home gives him people who will not allow the grand meaning of his project to erase the need to eat, sleep, repair a roof, hold a baby, and prepare for winter. The unanswered lives of Helga and Ylva remind us that sagas focus on travelers, while endurance often belongs to those who remain. Knut's later history creates a similar gap between the scale of the manga and the scale of the world. He continues building an empire, but the series ends without following him to death. What becomes of his dream of paradise? Knut succeeds in ways Thorfinn does not. He gathers kingdoms, controls armies, influences law, and creates periods of stability. People may live more safely under one strong ruler than during constant succession wars. His methods cannot be dismissed as meaningless simply because they involve power. But the empire depends on him. After his death, the structure cannot remain whole forever. The crown that promised control reveals its oldest limitation: rulers die. Did Knut know this? Did he build institutions meant to outlast him? Or did the growing reach of his personal authority make succession more fragile? Did he ever feel the irony that his earthly paradise depended on the same mortality he once used to question divine love? The manga's Knut is intelligent enough to recognize contradictions, but intelligence does not guarantee escape. He may continue negotiating with the head of Swain until the end, performing questionable acts in order to preserve the stability created by earlier questionable acts. Would a final mating with Thorfinn have changed him? Perhaps news of Vinland's collapse would confirm Knut's belief that power is necessary. He could point to the dead and say that ideals without force abandon good people to those willing to strike. Thorfinn could point to Knut's empire and say that force creates peace only while stronger force maintains it. Neither argument would be complete. Knut's world protects and coerces. Thorfinn's world inspires and fails. The unresolved debate is not a flaw left by the ending. It is the political mystery no society has permanently solved: how to protect people without allowing protection to become domination. The meaning of the true warrior remains tied to that debate. Thor says that a true warrior needs no sword. Thorfinn spends years trying to live those words. Yet what is a true warrior exactly? If the phrase means someone who never uses violence under any circumstance, then Thorfinn repeatedly falls short. He fights to survive. He uses skill against Garm. He restrains enemies. He considers the safety of people who depend on him. His hands cannot forget what they learned. If it means someone who possesses strength but refuses to use it for pride, revenge, or domination, then Thorfinn comes closer. The true warrior is not physically helpless. He is free enough to choose restraint. But even restraint can become pride. Thorfinn sometimes places his own moral burden at the center of decisions affecting everyone. Refusing weapons may protect his conscience while leaving others afraid. A true warrior may therefore need humility as much as courage, the willingness to admit that one person's purity is not the same as a community's safety. Could Thorfinn have authorized non-lethal defense? Could he have trained mediators, scouts, healers, and emergency groups without recreating an army? Could bows used for hunting remain outside political control? Where exactly is the line between preparation and the fear-driven escalation he wanted to avoid? The story does not answer. It transforms the phrase from a slogan into a lifelong question. Thor himself used violence in his final battle, though he avoided killing. Thorfinn absorbs 100 punches at Ketil's farm, but that act works partly because his body has been trained by violence. Hild protects through the skill of a hunter. Cordelia uses enormous strength to save people. Snake fights Gardar because he believes duty requires it. Perhaps a true warrior is not someone who has discovered one rule for every situation. It is someone who refuses to let the desire to defeat another person become the hidden purpose of action. That definition remains uncertain, which is why the phrase continues to matter. A solved philosophy becomes a commandment. An unresolved one remains alive. The same is true of the final question: did Thorfinn fail? On one level, yes, he wanted to establish a permanent land without war or slavery. The settlement cannot remain. Violence erupts. Einar dies. The survivors leave. Thorfinn does not achieve the future he described. On another level, no. For a period of time, people live differently. Enslaved and free men and women, people carrying different histories, and people seeking refuge work together. The settlement forms relationships with the LNU. Hild forgives Thorfinn. Cordelia finds belonging. Carly grows inside a community trying to reject the values that shaped his father's childhood. Wheat is exchanged. The experiment produces knowledge that survives its political collapse. A failure can still be real without being total. The mystery lies in the standard used to judge it. If peace must last forever to count, then no peaceful society has ever succeeded. If one day without violence is enough, the standard becomes too easy. Thorfinn needs something between those extremes, a way to value temporary good while learning why it remained temporary. The final chapter refuses to place a triumphant city on the horizon. Instead, it gives us a child and a sprouting plant. Both are fragile. Neither guarantees anything. Both require care after the story ends. The wheat growing in Vinland may be the quietest answer to the entire mystery. Thorfinn lives, but not everything he brought becomes an instrument of conquest. The LNU choose what to keep. The future is not controlled by the settler or the shaman alone. Could another Vinland emerge from that exchange? Not a Norse colony, but a local future altered by a brief encounter. Could stories of the man who refused war become part of oral memory? Could one person facing later newcomers remember that not every stranger arrived with the same intention? We cannot know. History rarely preserves evidence for the wars that did not begin because someone remembered an old lesson. This brings us to the mystery of who, within the world of the story, preserves Thorfinn's life at all. The historical sagas were written generations after the events they describe. Memory moved through families, oral tradition, political interest, and literary shaping before becoming text. Vinland Saga draws from those traditions while transforming them into a modern story. Who tells the fictional version after Thorfinn dies? Gudrid is an obvious possibility. She sees much of the later journey and could carry the story across countries. Carly and the younger child could preserve family memory. Bugeyes could supply trade routes and practical detail. Hild could record events with an inventor's precision. Leif already lives through storytelling. But none of them witnesses everything. Gudrid does not see Thorfinn's childhood with Askeladd. Thorfinn himself may describe it, though memory shaped by trauma is incomplete. Canute's private visions cannot be known by ordinary historians. Askeladd's thoughts at death belong to no surviving witness in full. This suggests that the manga's viewpoint is not meant to be one literal document. Still, thinking about transmission reveals how every story changes. Thorfinn may become more heroic in each retelling. Einar may be reduced to a companion rather than recognized as co-founder. The LNU perspective may disappear from Norse accounts. Gudrid's leadership may be described as support. Hild's forgiveness may survive while her anger is softened. Which version reaches the future? A saga about Vinland could easily become a story of brave explorers defeated by hostile natives. It could become propaganda for another expedition carrying more weapons. Thorfinn's moral meaning depends on preserving complexity that later storytellers may find inconvenient. Perhaps Gudrid's role as traveler matters here. She can tell the story in more than one place, preventing one local version from becoming the only memory. Perhaps Carly, who grew up between identities, can hold several perspectives at once. Or perhaps the full truth disappears, as most full truths do. We receive fragments and build meaning around them. Vinland Saga itself acknowledges this by giving emotional reality to people the old records barely describe. Fiction enters the blank spaces not to claim certainty, but to return human possibility to names preserved without inner lives. The biggest unsolved mystery of Vinland Saga may therefore be impossible to separate from the act of storytelling. How much of the Thorfinn we know is history, how much is legend, and how much is the person we need him to be? We need Thors to prove that a warrior can turn away. We need Askeladd to reveal that love and exploitation can inhabit the same damaged man. We need Canute to show the promise and corruption of power. We need Einar to prove that farming can be as central to history as battle. We need Hild to show that forgiveness belongs to the harmed, not the person asking for it. We need Gudrid to keep crossing borders. We need Thorfinn to attempt the impossible even after the story tells us why it may fail. That need does not make the characters false. It explains why they remain alive in the mind after their plotted questions end. And so we finally reach the mystery beneath every other mystery. Can Vinland exist? Not the coastline exists, not the historical settlement. Norse travelers reached North America. The question is whether the Vinland Thorfinn imagines, a place beyond war, slavery, and the assumption that strangers must become enemies, can exist for more than a fragile interval. The story offers evidence against it. Fear travels, resources become contested, disease ignores intention, different cultures misunderstand one another, ambitious people use uncertainty, weapons create pressure even before they are used. No community can escape the history carried by its members. But the story also offers evidence for it. Thors changes, Thorfinn changes, Alma refuses a battle, Hild forgives, Gudrid leaves the life chosen for her, Cordelia finds people who accept her, Canute turns away from Ketil's farm, former slaves build homes, settlers and LNU share food, language, tools, and laughter before fear overwhelms the relationship. Vinland exists repeatedly, but not permanently. Perhaps permanence was the mistaken demand. Human beings often treat a good condition as real only if it can never be lost. Yet life itself is temporary. A meal is not meaningless because hunger returns. A harvest is not a failure because another winter comes. Peace may be work that must be renewed rather than an object that can be secured forever. This does not excuse preventable collapse. Thorfinn must learn from the sword, the disease, the lack of shared institutions, and the limits of personal trust. A second attempt should not repeat the first while calling persistence virtue. The ending gives no blueprint, it gives responsibility to the future. Maybe Carly creates a different settlement, maybe Gudrid carries the lesson across Europe, maybe Hild turns experience into practical systems that reduce fear. Maybe the wheat feeds families who never know Einar's name. Maybe Thorfinn spends the rest of his life creating small places where a person can arrive without being owned. Or maybe the dream disappears for centuries and returns in another language. The phrase, "I have no enemies," is easy to misunderstand as a description of the world. The world clearly contains people who may attack, exploit, or kill. Thorfinn's statement is a decision about relationship. He refuses to build his identity around the need to destroy another person. Can an entire society make that decision? The manga does not know, neither does history. That uncertainty is why the ending is not a closed answer. The final page passes the question outward. The reader now knows how difficult the dream is, how badly a good attempt can fail, and how much courage is required to try without pretending courage will guarantee success. The biggest unsolved mysteries of Vinland Saga begin with missing battles, hidden motives, visions, lost years, and unwritten futures. They lead us through Thor's desertion, Askeladd's faith in Artorius, Canute's haunted crown, Snake's forgotten life in Miklagard, the journey to Greece, Hild's forgiveness, Cordelia's family, the shaman's prophecy, Einar's death, and the final wheat growing after the ships have gone. But all of them return to one question. What do people do with the violence they inherit? Floki preserves it, Thorkel enjoys it, Askeladd manipulates it, Canute tries to control it, Hild carries it until she can release one part of its claim. Einar turns the memory of destruction toward cultivation. Thors walks away. Thorfinn walks away, returns, fails, and keeps moving. None of them solves humanity. They only decide what to do next. That may be the most honest conclusion a story about peace can offer. There is no final victory after which people become incapable of cruelty. There is no distant continent where responsibility ends. There are only choices made by frightened, wounded, hopeful people in the presence of other frightened, wounded, hopeful people. Some choices become swords. Some become wheat. And the future grows from both. If the biggest unsolved mysteries of Vinland Saga have left you wondering how Thorfinn became the man capable of attempting such an impossible dream, the next story begins much earlier, with a child on an Icelandic shore, a father carrying a hidden past, and a voyage that turns grief into revenge. Continue next with the entire life story of Thorfinn, where every stage of his journey, from Askeladd's battlefield to Ketil's farm and the final days in Vinland, can be followed as one complete, calm story. You can also continue deeper into the mystery of the man who started it all with the entire story of Thors, the Troll of Jam, or move into the more speculative side of the series with the wildest Vinland Saga conspiracy theories. Together, those stories form the larger picture: the father who rejected war, the son who tried to build peace, and the unanswered possibilities hidden between them. Subscribe for more long-form Vinland Saga lore to fall asleep to, and leave the character, mystery, historical event, or forgotten piece of the world you would like explored next. For now, the ships have moved beyond the horizon. The abandoned houses stand quietly beside the fields. Somewhere in Iceland, a father holds a child he has only just met. Somewhere across the sea, green shoots rise through unfamiliar soil. No one knows what will grow from them. That is why the saga is over, but the mystery remains.